She counted her bruises at 3 in the morning, 23 marks hidden beneath designer clothes. Her husband was a millionaire. Her prison was a mansion. And no one believed a woman who had everything could be suffering. But here is what her husband never knew. The wife he beat 99 times was the daughter of one of America's most powerful CEOs. And Daddy was about to burn his empire to the ground. What happens when a monster picks the wrong victim? Stay until the end because this story takes a twist you will never see coming. If stories like this move you, hit subscribe and drop a comment. Your support helps more people find hope. The bathroom mirror never lied. Caroline Ashford Whitmore stood before it at 3 in the morning, counting bruises the way other women counted blessings. 23 visible marks tonight. She had learned to catalog them like inventory, organizing them by color and age. The fresh ones glowed angry purple against her pale skin. The older ones had faded to sickly yellow, almost ready to disappear entirely before new ones took their place. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, 7 months pregnant with a child who would be born into this nightmare unless she found a way out. The baby kicked, and Caroline flinched, then immediately felt guilty for the reaction. She was already teaching her daughter to fear sudden movements. "We are going to be okay," Caroline whispered to her reflection. The words sounded hollow even to her own ears. She had been telling herself that same lie for 6 years now. The Greenwich mansion sprawled around her like a beautiful prison. 12,000 square feet of Italian marble, crystal chandeliers, and carefully curated artwork. Every surface gleamed with wealth. Every room echoed with emptiness. Marcus had chosen this house specifically for its isolation. The nearest neighbor was half a mile away. The security gates kept people out, but they also kept Caroline in. She remembered the day she had first seen this place, back when Marcus Whitmore had seemed like a dream come true. He had been charming then, with his easy smile and attentive manner. He had listened to her complaints about her controlling father, validated her desire for independence, and promised her a life where she would be cherished and respected. "Your father does not appreciate you," Marcus had said during their whirlwind courtship. "He treats you like a possession, not a daughter. I would never do that to you." The irony of those words burned like acid in her throat now. Caroline turned away from the mirror and moved silently through the darkened hallway. Marcus had finally passed out in his study after tonight's episode, surrounded by empty whiskey bottles and the remnants of his rage. She had learned to navigate the house without making a sound, knew which floorboards creaked and which doors needed extra pressure to close quietly. In the kitchen, she filled a glass with water, her hands trembling slightly. The engagement ring on her finger caught the moonlight streaming through the window. 3 carats of flawless diamond, worth more than most people made in a year. It felt like a shackle. Her phone sat on the counter, but it was useless to her. Marcus monitored every call, every text, every search. He had installed tracking software months ago, claiming it was for her safety. "The world is dangerous," he had explained with that patient, condescending tone he used when he wanted her to feel stupid. "I need to know where you are at all times. What if something happened to you? What if something happened to you?" The words had sounded protective then. Now she understood them for what they really were, a threat wrapped in concern. The charity luncheon was tomorrow. Caroline would have to smile and make small talk with Manhattan's elite while hiding the evidence of her husband's temper beneath layers of concealer and a carefully chosen dress. She had become an expert at this particular performance. The devoted wife, the grateful partner, the woman who had everything. She thought about her father then, the way she always did in these dark hours. Richard Ashford had warned her about Marcus. He had seen something in her fiancé's eyes that Caroline had been too blinded by rebellion to notice. "That man has dead eyes," Richard had said during their final argument. "When you are not looking at him, his face goes completely blank. That is not normal. Caroline, there is something wrong with him." She had dismissed her father's concerns as jealousy and control. She had accused him of trying to manipulate her, of being unable to accept that she wanted a life outside his shadow. She had said terrible things, words designed to wound, and then she had eloped with Marcus and never looked back. "When this falls apart," Richard had called after her as she stormed out, "do not come crying to me." She had not spoken to him since. 6 years of silence. 6 years of pride that had curdled into shame. How could she possibly reach out now and admit that he had been right all along? The sound of movement upstairs made Caroline freeze. She held her breath, listening as Marcus's footsteps crossed the floor above her head. He was awake. He was moving. She quickly dumped the water and placed the glass silently in the sink, then slipped into the shadows of the butler's pantry just as the kitchen light flicked on. "Caroline." Marcus's voice was rough from whiskey and sleep. "Where are you?" She did not answer. Sometimes, if she stayed quiet long enough, he would give up and go back to bed. She pressed herself against the wall, one hand protectively covering her belly, and waited. His footsteps circled the kitchen, stopped. She could picture him standing there, scanning the room with those cold gray eyes, searching for her, hunting. "I know you are down here," he said. "I can smell your fear." Carolyn closed her eyes and prayed. The footsteps moved away. The light clicked off. She heard him climbing the stairs, heard the master bedroom door close. Only then did she allow herself to breathe. Tomorrow day at the charity luncheon, she would see her brother Teddy across the room. They would make eye contact, and she would look away first, the way she always did, because looking too long might invite questions, and questions might lead to answers she was not ready to give. But tonight, alone in the darkness of her gilded cage, Carolyn made herself a promise. She would find a way out, for herself, for her baby, whatever it took. She just had to survive long enough to do it. The charity luncheon at the Waldorf Astoria was everything Caroline had dreaded. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across designer gowns and tailored suits. Laughter tinkled like wind chimes as Manhattan's elite congratulated themselves on their generosity. Carolyn moved through the crowd in a navy blue dress that covered her arms to the wrists and her back to the neck, smiling until her cheeks ached. Marcus stood across the room, charming a group of investors with a story that made them all laugh. He looked every inch the successful hedge fund manager, handsome, confident, magnetic. No one would ever suspect that the same hands he used to gesture so elegantly had left bruises all over his pregnant wife's body. Caroline excused herself and slipped into the ladies' room. She locked herself in the stall and leaned against the door, breathing slowly, fighting the nausea that had nothing to do with pregnancy. When she emerged to wash her hands, she found herself face to face with her sister-in-law. Margaret Whitmore, Marcus's older sister, had the same cold gray eyes as her brother, though she masked them better with practiced warmth. "Caroline, darling," Margaret said, air-kissing both cheeks. "You look exhausted. Is Marcus not letting you rest?" "I am fine," Caroline said automatically. "Just tired from the pregnancy." Margaret's eyes flickered to Caroline's wrists, where the sleeve had ridden up slightly to reveal the edge of a bruise. Caroline quickly adjusted the fabric. "You should be more careful," Margaret said, her voice carrying a warning that had nothing to do with concern. "Accidents can be so dangerous, especially in your condition." She swept out of the bathroom, leaving Caroline trembling at the sink. Later that evening, after Marcus had drunk himself into unconsciousness again, Carolyn crept into his study. She knew she was taking an enormous risk. If he caught her going through his things, the consequences would be severe. But she could not keep living like this, waiting for the night when he went too far. She found the burner phone in a locked drawer, using a hairpin to pick the cheap lock. Her heart hammered as she scrolled through the messages, all sent to someone saved simply as V. "After the baby is born, we can handle the situation more permanently." One message read, "She is becoming a liability," said another. "We discussed contingencies." Elizabeth was simpler. This one has family complications. Elizabeth, Marcus's first wife, who had died in a car accident 3 years before Caroline met him. The police had ruled it an accident. Caroline had never questioned that verdict. Now, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone, she began to photograph every message, every contact, every piece of evidence she could find. She rifled through his desk drawers and discovered financial documents showing transfers from her trust fund, the one her father had given her as a wedding gift that she had never touched, into offshore accounts she had never heard of. He had been stealing from her, planning something terrible, and she had been too blind, too trapped, too ashamed to see it. Over the following days, Carolyn began building her case in secret. She photographed every bruise with date stamps. She recorded conversations when she could, hiding a small digital recorder in her pocket. She made copies of financial documents and hid them in a box at the back of her closet, beneath old sweaters she never wore. She even tried to access her own bank accounts, going to the branch in person while Marcus was at work. The manager looked at her with pity that made Caroline's skin crawl. "I am sorry, Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "Your husband has full control of all joint accounts. According to our records, you signed power of attorney documents giving him authority over your individual accounts as well." "I never signed anything like that," Caroline said. But even as she spoke, she remembered nights when Marcus had put papers in front of her while she was half asleep or still reeling from an episode of violence. "Just sign here, sweetheart. It is for the household accounts." She had been so careful not to anger him, so desperate to keep the peace, and he had used that desperation to trap her completely. Carolyn left the bank with $47 in cash, the contents of her wallet, no credit cards of her own, no identification, because Marcus kept those safe in his office. In desperation, she went to the emergency room, claiming she had fallen down the stairs. The young doctor on duty, Dr. Eleanor Vance, examined her with gentle hands and knowing eyes. "Mrs. Whitmore," Dr. Vance said quietly, "I have been an emergency physician for 15 years. I know what a fall looks like. This is not a fall." Carolyn opened her mouth to protest, but something in the doctor's expression stopped her. Dr. Vance reached into her pocket and pressed a small wire to Carolyn's heart. "Domestic violence hotline," she said. "They can help. Whatever he has told you, whatever he has made you believe, you do not deserve this. No one does." Caroline called the number from a payphone at a gas station the next afternoon, her heart pounding with equal parts hope and terror. "I am so sorry," the woman on the other end said, her voice genuinely regretful. "All our shelter beds are full right now. I can put you on the wait list. We should have an opening in about 3 weeks. 3 weeks, an eternity when every night brought the possibility of violence. That evening, Marcus found her hidden photographs. He did not scream or hit her. Instead, he sat her down at the kitchen table and spoke in a calm, measured voice that was somehow more terrifying than any rage. "If you ever try to leave me," he said, "I will have you committed. I have a psychiatrist ready to testify that you are mentally unstable. I have been documenting your episodes for years. The crying, the paranoia, the delusions of persecution. No court in the country will give custody of a child to a woman who has been institutionalized." Carolyn felt the ground falling away beneath her. "Your father already thinks you are a failure." Marcus continued, "Imagine what he will think when I tell him his daughter is crazy. Imagine your brother's face when he learns you had to be locked away for your own safety." He made her burn the photographs, made her watch them curl and blacken in the fireplace while he stood behind her, one hand resting on her shoulder like a lover's caress. "Good girl, Perp," he said when the last image turned to ash. "Now we understand each other." Caroline stared at the dying flames and felt something inside her die with them. The morning after Marcus destroyed her evidence, Caroline walked to the end of their long driveway to collect the mail. She moved slowly, every step a reminder of yesterday's punishment when her compliance had not come quickly enough. The autumn leaves crunched beneath her feet, and she paused to breathe the crisp air. Savoring these few minutes of solitude, a woman was walking her small terrier on the road outside the gates. Caroline recognized her as Miranda Collins, the widow who lived in the modest colonial half a mile away. They had nodded at each other occasionally over the past 2 years, but never spoken beyond pleasantries. Today, Miranda stopped at the gate and looked at Caroline with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Forgive me for being forward," Miranda said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had seen too much of life to waste time on pretense. "But I was married to a man like yours for 22 years. I know what I am seeing when I look at you." Carolyn's first instinct was to deny everything. The lies were automatic now, as natural as breathing. But something in Miranda's weathered face stopped her. The older woman's eyes held no judgment, only a deep and terrible understanding. "I do not know what you mean," Caroline said weakly. "You do, though." Miranda reached through the gate and pressed a folded piece of paper into Caroline's hand. "That is my phone number. When you are ready to talk, I will be there. And if you are not ready, that is okay too. But please know that you are not alone, you are not crazy, and you do not deserve what is happening to you." She walked away before Caroline could respond, the little terrier trotting at her heels. Caroline stood at the gate for a long time, The paper clutched in her fist, tears streaming down her face. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her with kindness, so long since she had felt seen. 2 days later, when Marcus left for a business trip to Chicago, Caroline called the number. Her hands shook so badly she could barely dial. "I thought you might call," Miranda said simply. "Come over. I have tea and cookies and a complete lack of patience for men who hurt women." Miranda's house was nothing like the Whitmore mansion. It was small, cluttered, and filled with the accumulated evidence of a long life well lived. Books overflowed from shelves. Photographs covered every surface. A fat orange cat dozed on the windowsill. They sat in Miranda's kitchen, and Caroline talked. She talked for 3 hours straight, the words pouring out like water from a broken dam. She told Miranda everything: the abuse, the isolation, the financial control, the threats, the fear that lived in her chest like a second heartbeat. Miranda listened without interruption, occasionally refilling Caroline's tea or pushing the cookie plate closer. When Caroline finally fell silent, exhausted and empty, the older woman nodded slowly. "I was 30 years old when my husband broke my arm for the first time," Miranda said. "I told everyone I fell off a ladder while cleaning gutters. I was 45 when he cracked 3 of my ribs. I said I slipped on ice. I was 52 when he gave me a concussion so severe I could not remember my own name for 3 days. I told the doctors I had a car accident." Caroline stared at her, horrified. "He died of a heart attack when I was 54. Miranda continued. "I spent 22 years being terrified of him, and then one morning he was just gone. I stood over his body and felt nothing but relief. That is not how anyone should feel when their husband dies." "How did you survive?" Caroline whispered. "By being very careful and very lucky." Miranda leaned forward, her eyes fierce. "You do not have to wait for luck. Caroline, whoa, you can make your own, but you need to be smart about it." Over the following weeks, Miranda became Caroline's secret teacher. She had worked as a court reporter for 3 decades before retirement and knew exactly what kind of evidence would hold up in legal proceedings. She taught Caroline about chain of custody, about documenting dates and times, about securing witnesses. Most importantly, she gave Caroline a place to hide things. A lockbox in Miranda's basement held backup copies of every photograph, every recording, every document. A prepaid cell phone, purchased with cash, allowed Caroline to make calls Marcus could not trace. "I found a lawyer," Caroline told Miranda one afternoon, her voice trembling with hope. "A woman from the domestic violence hotline connected me with someone who does pro bono work. She says I have a strong case. With the financial evidence and the documented abuse, I could get a restraining order, emergency custody of the baby, maybe even criminal charges." Miranda's face lit up. "That is wonderful news. We are filing papers next week." Caroline could barely believe she was saying the words. "She thinks the judge will grant an emergency protective order the same day. I could be free in a week." "Miranda?" "Actually free." For 3 days, Caroline lived in a state of cautious optimism she had not felt in years. She began mentally packing, deciding what few possessions she would take when she left. She talked to her unborn daughter about the future, painting pictures of a life without fear. Then Marcus came home from his business trip. He walked into the bedroom where Caroline was folding laundry and smiled at her in a way that made her blood freeze. "I know about the lawyer," he said pleasantly. Caroline could not speak, could not move. "I have a private investigator who has been following you for months. He is very thorough." Marcus sat down on the bed, picking up one of her sweaters and examining it idly. "The lawyer will not be practicing much longer. I have already made some calls to the state bar about certain irregularities in her record. Completely fabricated, of course. But by the time she clears her name, you will have had the baby, and I will have full custody." "Marcus, please," Caroline heard herself begging. "And your little friend, Miranda." He shook his head sadly. "Such a sweet old woman, living all alone in that big house. It would be terrible if something happened to her. A fall down the stairs, perhaps an electrical fire in the night." Caroline felt the world crumbling beneath her feet. Every escape route she had carefully constructed was being demolished before her eyes. "I do not want to hurt anyone," Marcus said, standing and cupping her face in his hands with mock tenderness. I just want my wife to be happy and grateful and obedient. Is that so much to ask? He kissed her forehead and walked out, leaving Caroline standing amid the wreckage of her hopes. That night, she called Miranda from the prepaid phone, her voice breaking. He knows everything. He threatened you. I am so sorry. I have put you in danger, and now we have nothing. We have each other, Miranda said firmly, and we will figure out another way. But Carolyn knew, with a certainty that settled in her bones like winter cold, that there might not be another way. Marcus's reach extended further than she had ever imagined. Every person who tried to help her ended up in his crosshairs. She was more trapped than ever. The silence from Miranda lasted 2 days. Caroline called the prepaid phone over and over, each unanswered ring amplifying her dread. On the third morning, she told Marcus she needed to see her obstetrician and drove instead to Miranda's house. The front door was unlocked. The orange cat sat on the porch, meowing plaintively. Carolyn found Miranda in the kitchen, slumped in her chair at the table where they had shared so many conversations. Her cup of tea sat beside her, still half full. Her eyes were closed, her face peaceful. She might have been sleeping, except for the absolute stillness of her chest. No, Caroline whispered. No, no, no. She called 911 from Miranda's landline, her voice barely coherent. The paramedics arrived and pronounced Miranda dead at the scene. Heart attack. They said, natural causes. These things happen to women her age. The detective who took Caroline's statement was kind but dismissive when she tried to explain her concerns. Ma'am, I understand you are upset, he said. Mrs. Collins was 67 years old with a documented heart condition. There is no sign of foul play. She was healthy, Caroline insisted. She walked her dog every day. She was not sick. The detective's expression shifted to something uncomfortably close to pity. Sometimes these things just happen. I am very sorry for your loss. After everyone left, Caroline searched Miranda's house with frantic desperation. The lockbox in the basement was gone. Every piece of evidence they had gathered, every photograph and document and recording, had vanished without a trace. She sat on Miranda's kitchen floor and sobbed until she had nothing left. The stress hit her body like a physical blow. That night, she woke to searing pain in her abdomen, blood soaking through her nightgown. Marcus drove her to the hospital with an expression of concern so convincing that the emergency room staff treated him like a hero. Dr. Vance was on duty. She took one look at Caroline's face and cleared the room of everyone except essential medical personnel. You are having contractions, she said quietly. We need to stop them, or you will deliver too early. Is the baby okay? Caroline could barely form the words through her terror. For now, Dr. Vance squeezed her hand. We are going to give you medication to stop the labor and put you on strict bed rest. You need to stay calm. The stress you are under is putting both of you at risk. Caroline wanted to laugh at the bitter irony. Stay calm, as if that were possible. Marcus appeared at her bedside the moment visitors were allowed, playing the devoted husband to perfection. When Dr. Vance tried to speak with Caroline privately, Marcus smoothly intervened. My wife is exhausted, he said with a charming smile. Surely any questions can wait until she is feeling stronger. Dr. Vance's jaw tightened, but she had no grounds to insist. When they returned home 3 days later, Caroline found her world had shrunk even further. Marcus installed a live-in nurse named Patricia, ostensibly to monitor Caroline's health during her bed rest. In reality, Patricia reported Caroline's every move, every phone call, every visitor. Not that there were any visitors. Miranda was dead. The lawyer had been disbarred pending investigation. Everyone who had tried to help Caroline had been systematically eliminated from her life. The walls of the beautiful bedroom closed in around her. She was not allowed to leave the bed except to use the bathroom, always with Patricia hovering nearby. Her meals were brought on trays. Her entertainment was limited to approved television programs and books that Patricia vetted first. You need to rest, Marcus told her each night when he came to check on her. The baby needs you to rest. I am only thinking of what is best for our family. Our family. The words made her skin crawl. 1 week into her captivity, Marcus came to her with a folder of documents. I have had my lawyers draw up some papers, he said, settling into the chair beside her bed with the casual confidence of a man who knew he had already won. A post-nuptial agreement, just to clarify a few things about our arrangement. Carolyn took the folder with numb hands. The documents inside were comprehensive. She would relinquish all claims to marital assets. She would agree to supervise visitation only with any children of the marriage. She would acknowledge a history of mental instability that made her an unfit parent. "I am not signing this," she said. Marcus smiled. "Then I will release the footage." He pulled out his phone and played a video. Caroline watched herself on screen, crying hysterically, throwing objects, screaming incoherently. The footage was real but completely stripped of context. It showed her reactions to his abuse without showing the abuse itself. She looked exactly like the unstable woman he had always claimed she was. "I have 6 years of material like this," Marcus said. "Every breakdown, every moment of weakness, every time you lost control, I can release it to the media, to the courts, to your family. By the time I am done, no one will believe a word you say. You will lose the baby, your reputation, everything." He set the documents on her bedside table and stood. "You have 48 hours to decide. Sign the papers, and we continue as we have been. Refuse, and I destroy you." He walked out, closing the door softly behind him. Caroline stared at the ceiling for a long time, her hand resting on her belly where her daughter kicked and shifted. This was it. Then, the end of the line. She had no evidence, no allies, no resources. Marcus had won. She thought about the window across the room, 3 stories up, high enough. The baby kicked again, hard, as if in protest. Caroline closed her eyes and made herself breathe, in and out, in and out. She could not give up. Her daughter needed her. She was the only protection this child had against the monster who had fathered her. There was one option left, one person with enough power to match Marcus, the person she had sworn never to speak to again, her father. Patricia fell asleep in the armchair around midnight, lulled by the boring documentary playing on the television. Caroline waited another 30 minutes to be certain, then crept silently to the landline in the hallway. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the number she had memorized 6 years ago and never called. It rang once, twice, 3 times. She was about to hang up when a voice answered. "Ashford Residence." It was Richard himself, not a servant. He sounded tired, older than she remembered. "Daddy," Carolyn whispered, using a word she had not spoken since she was 12 years old. "I need help." The silence stretched so long that she feared he would hang up. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "I know. I have been waiting for this call." Caroline nearly dropped the phone. "What do you mean?" "Come home, sweetheart. I will explain everything. Can you get out safely?" "I do not know. He has someone watching me. The house is monitored." "Then listen carefully." Richard's voice shifted into the commanding tone of a man who had built a corporate empire from nothing. "Tomorrow afternoon, Patricia will receive a call from her sister in Portland. Emergency. She will need to leave immediately. That is when you go." Caroline's mind reeled. "How do you know about Patricia?" "I know everything, Caroline. I have known for months. But I could not force you to accept help. You had to choose it. You had to be ready." He paused. "Are you ready?" She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes." "Then I will see you tomorrow. We have a lot to discuss." The line went dead. Carolyn replaced the receiver with shaking hands and crept back to bed. Her heart pounding with something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. The next afternoon, exactly as Richard had predicted, Patricia received an urgent call and left in a flurry of apologies. Within an hour, a black town car pulled up to the gates of the Whitmore estate. 2 men in dark suits approached the front door. Carolyn met them with nothing but the clothes on her back and the documents she had managed to hide inside her mattress during bed rest. "Mrs. Ashford," one of the men said, using her maiden name, "your father sent us. We need to move quickly." She did not look back as they drove away. The safe house was a nondescript apartment in a secure building in Westchester. Richard was waiting for her there, looking older and grayer than she remembered, but with the same sharp eyes that missed nothing. When she walked through the door, he opened his arms. Carolyn fell into them and wept like a child. "I am sorry," "I am so sorry. You were right about everything, and I was too proud to listen." "Hush now." Here, Richard stroked her hair the way he had when she was small. "You are here. That is what matters." When she had calmed enough to speak, she sat across from her father in the small living room while he explained, "I have been watching Marcus for 8 months." Richard said, "After I received an anonymous tip about your situation, I hired my own investigators. What they found was disturbing enough that I began building a case." "Anonymous tip from who?" "A doctor, Eleanor Vance. She saw you in the emergency room and recognized the Ashford name. She reached out to me through back channels, told me what she suspected." Caroline thought of the quiet physician who had pressed the hotline card into her hand. She had been fighting for Caroline even then. "I have evidence of Marcus's financial crimes," Richard continued. "Fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. I have testimony about his abusive behavior from multiple sources. I have investigators looking into the death of his first wife, Elizabeth, and what they have found is deeply troubling." "He killed her, cousin," Caroline said flatly. "I am certain of it." Richard nodded grimly. "We are building a case to prove it, but I could not act without your cooperation. If I had tried to intervene without your consent, Marcus would have used it against you. He would have claimed I was manipulating you, controlling you, proving his narrative about your mental instability. So you waited. The hardest thing I have ever done was watching my daughter suffer and knowing I had to wait for her to come to me." Richard's voice broke. "Every day I wanted to tear down that house and drag you out, but it had to be your choice. Caroline, you had to choose freedom for yourself." She understood, even though it hurt. She had spent 6 years believing her father was a controlling tyrant, when in reality he had been watching over her from a distance, gathering evidence, preparing for the moment that she would be ready to fight. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Now we go to war. My legal team is ready. We will file for emergency protective orders, freeze Marcus's assets, and have him arrested for financial crimes within the week. By the time he realizes what is happening, it will be over." For 2 days, everything went according to plan. The news broke that Caroline Ashford Whitmore had left her husband and was being supported by her family. Sympathetic coverage painted her as a survivor. Public sentiment turned against Marcus. His company's stock began to drop. Caroline allowed herself to believe it was over. Then Marcus released the videos. Every news channel carried them. Caroline crying and screaming. Caroline throwing things. Caroline looking every inch the unstable woman Marcus had always described. A psychiatrist he had paid gave interviews about fabricated abuse syndrome and the dangers of believing accusations without evidence. Within 48 hours, public opinion reversed. The comments under every article called her a liar, a gold digger, a crazy woman trying to destroy an innocent man. Worst of all, a judge granted Marcus emergency custody rights over the unborn child. If Caroline gave birth, her daughter would be taken from her immediately. She sat in the safe house, watching the coverage, and felt the ground crumble beneath her feet once again. The media called her crazy. The internet called her worse. Caroline sat in the safe house watching strangers dissect her life, her mental health, her fitness as a mother, and felt herself drowning. Her brother Teddy called on the third day, his voice uncomfortable. "Caroline, are you sure you are not exaggerating? These videos are pretty damning. Maybe Marcus has a temper, but the things you are claiming." She hung up on him and threw the phone across the room. Richard found her like that, curled in a ball on the couch, staring at nothing. "I have lost," she said dully. "He won. He always wins." Richard sat beside her and took her hand. "He has won a battle. The war is not over. Everyone thinks I am crazy. My own brother thinks I am crazy. How can I fight that? By telling your story on your own terms." Richard pulled out his phone and showed her an email. "A producer from a major news network has been reaching out. They want to do an exclusive interview with you. Your side? Unedited? Uninterrupted." Caroline shook her head. I cannot face the cameras and have people judging every word, every expression." "Then he wins." Richard's voice was gentle but firm. "Caroline, I cannot fight this battle for you. I can give you resources, support, protection, but you are the only one who can tell your truth. You have to decide if you are going to let Marcus define your narrative or if you are going to define it yourself." She thought about Miranda. who had survived 22 years of abuse and spent her final weeks trying to help a woman she barely knew. She thought about Dr. Vance, who had risked her career to reach out to a stranger's father. She thought about every woman who had ever been called crazy for speaking up about the violence done to her. "I will do it," Carolyn said, "but on my conditions. No sensationalism, no edited clips, the full interview or nothing." The interview aired 4 days later. Caroline sat in a simple chair, wearing minimal makeup, and told the truth without embellishment or dramatization. "I stayed because I was ashamed," she said, looking directly into the camera. "I had cut off my family to marry this man. Admitting he was hurting me meant admitting I had made a terrible mistake. So I convinced myself it was not that bad, that he would change, that I could love him enough to fix him." She paused, collecting herself. "The videos Marcus released are real. Those are real moments of me breaking down. But what the videos do not show is what happened for each one of those moments. The hitting, the choking, the threats against my life and my baby's life. He filmed my reactions to his abuse and edited out the abuse itself. That is how calculated he is. That is how long he has been planning for this moment." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Women across the country began sharing their own stories using a hashtag that trended for days. Other journalists dug deeper into Marcus's past and found troubling patterns. Two former employees came forward to describe his explosive temper at work. A former girlfriend from college described behavior eerily similar to what Caroline had experienced. The tide was turning, but slowly. Marcus's lawyers fought back hard, discrediting witnesses and challenging evidence at every turn. What they needed was something unimpeachable, something that could not be explained away or spun. Carolyn knew who might be able to provide it. She found Vanessa Holt's personal email through Richard's investigators and sent a message late one night. "He will do to you what he did to me, what he did to Elizabeth. I know you are scared. I was scared too, but the only way out is through. Please." The response came 3 days later, from an encrypted account. "I am not ready to talk, but I am listening," Caroline wrote back. She told Vanessa about the night Marcus had almost strangled her during her first trimester, how his hands had tightened around her throat until she saw stars. She described finding the messages about handling the situation after the baby was born. She explained how Marcus had systematically isolated her from everyone who might have helped. "He is charming and terrifying in equal measure," she wrote. "The charm keeps you hoping. The terror keeps you trapped. But the charm is a mask. The terror is real. Eventually the mask will slip with you too. And when it does, you will need someone who believes you." Vanessa did not respond for 2 weeks. During that time, Carolyn began working with women's advocacy organizations. She spoke at support groups, sharing her story and listening to others. She consulted with lawyers about creating a foundation to help domestic violence survivors navigate the legal system. She was not just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every woman who had ever been told she was too crazy to be believed. Her father watched her transformation with quiet pride. "Your mother would be proud of you," he said one evening. "I wish she could be here." "She is." Richard put his hand over his heart. "Right here. She always believed you would find your way. I am sorry I did not have the same faith." Carolyn hugged him, feeling the old walls between them finally beginning to crumble. The next morning, Vanessa Holt's message arrived. "He hit me last night. First time. He said I was becoming like Elizabeth. I have his laptop. I have everything. Tell me what to do." The Manhattan courthouse stood like a monument to justice, its marble columns rising against a gray November sky. Media trucks lined the street. Protesters held signs on both sides of the divide. Caroline walked up the steps flanked by her father and her lawyers, cameras flashing like a storm of lightning. Marcus Whitmore stood at the opposite entrance, his legal team surrounding him like a protective wall. He looked confident, well-rested, every inch the successful businessman being unfairly persecuted. Their eyes met briefly across the chaos. Marcus smiled. Carolyn did not look away. Inside the courtroom, Judge Patricia Winters brought the proceedings to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. She was known for running a tight ship and tolerating no theatrics from either side. "This court is convened to hear the case of Ashford versus Whitmore and the state of New York versus Marcus Whitmore," she announced. "I expect all parties to conduct themselves with dignity and respect for these proceedings." The prosecution, led by a veteran assistant district attorney named Margaret Foster, opened with a comprehensive overview of the charges: financial fraud, assault, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. The evidence will show, Margaret said, pacing slowly before the jury, that Marcus Whitmore is not the wronged husband he pretends to be. He is a calculating predator who systematically abused his wife, stole her assets, and attempted to discredit her when she tried to escape. The evidence will further show a troubling pattern that suggests his first wife, Elizabeth Whitmore, may have met her death through similar calculations and rather than simple accident. The defense attorney, a silver-haired man named Douglas Mercer, with a reputation for getting guilty clients acquitted, objected strenuously to any mention of Elizabeth's death. The judge sustained his objection for the moment, but noted that further evidence might warrant revisiting the issue. The first 3 days of testimony established the financial crimes. Forensic accountants has walked the jury through offshore accounts and shell corporations. Bank records showed systematic transfers of Caroline's trust fund into holdings controlled solely by Marcus. Digital forensics experts authenticated the documents and traced the electronic paper trail. Marcus's defense tried to argue that Caroline had consented to these transfers, but the prosecution produced the forged signature analysis. 3 separate handwriting experts testified that Caroline's signatures on the key documents were fabrications. Then Vanessa Holt took the stand. She looked different from the polished woman Caroline had seen at social events over the years. Her face was pale, her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. "I was Marcus Whitmore's mistress for 2 years," she said. "During that time, I witnessed behavior that I initially tried to explain away. His explosive temper, his need for absolute control, the way he talked about his wife as if she were property to be managed rather than a person to be loved." Margaret Foster approached with a folder. "Miss Holt, can you describe what you observed regarding the defendant's treatment of his wife?" "He would come to my apartment after incidents at home and describe what he had done. At first it was psychological abuse, isolation, gaslighting, making her believe she was losing her mind. Later it became physical. He would show me photographs of her injuries and laugh about how clumsy she was." The jury shifted uncomfortably. "He told me once that his first wife, Elizabeth, had been the same way. Clumsy, accident-prone." He said it with a smile that made my blood run cold. Douglas Mercer attacked her credibility viciously during cross-examination, painting her as a scorned mistress trying to destroy the man who had rejected her. But Vanessa held firm, and when he pushed too hard, she delivered her final blow. "I have Marcus Whitmore's personal laptop," she said. "It contains emails proving he paid to have his first wife's brakes tampered with. It contains financial records showing exactly how he laundered money through shell corporations. And it contains recordings he made of himself planning how to handle Caroline after the baby was born." The courtroom erupted. Judge Winters banged her gavel repeatedly until order was restored. Carolyn watched Marcus's face as his carefully constructed defense crumbled. For just a moment, the mask slipped, and she saw the monster underneath, pure rage barely contained. Then the mask was back, smooth and confident, but the jury had seen the glimpse too. After Vanessa's testimony, Carolyn herself took the stand. She had rehearsed this moment dozens of times, but nothing could prepare her for the reality of facing her abuser across the courtroom. "Mrs. Whitmore," Margaret Foster said gently, "can you describe for the jury what your life was like during your marriage to the defendant?" Carolyn took a breath. "At first, it was wonderful. Marcus was everything I thought I wanted. Charming, attentive, protective. The change was so gradual that I barely noticed it happening. Little criticisms became constant put-downs. Suggestions became commands. Protection became control." Oh, she described the first time he hit her, 3 months into the marriage. She described the escalating violence, the isolation, the financial control that left her trapped without resources. She described finding the messages about handling the pregnancy problem and the terror that had driven her to finally seek help. When Douglas Mercer cross-examined her, he tried every trick in the book to rattle her. He played clips from the videos Marcus had released, asking her to explain each moment of apparent instability. He suggested she was exaggerating, attention-seeking, mentally ill. Carolyn remained calm. "Those videos show my reactions to being abused," she said. "They are evidence of what he did to me. not evidence of my mental state. A woman crying after being beaten is not crazy. She is traumatized. There is a difference. When she stepped down from the stand, Richard was waiting just outside the courtroom doors. He pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "You are magnificent," he said. I was terrified. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite the fear. The trial entered its second week with momentum firmly on the prosecution's side. But Douglas Mercer was not finished. He called a parade of character witnesses who testified to Marcus's generosity, his business acumen, his devoted nature. Former colleagues described him as tough, but fair. Charity board members praised his philanthropic contributions. Then Marcus himself took the stand. He was perfect, humble, apologetic, carefully emotional. He admitted to having a temper, but described it as a flaw he had worked to control. He expressed deep regret for any pain Carolyn had experienced, but suggested that her mental health struggles had colored her perception of their relationship. "I loved my wife," Marcus said, his voice catching convincingly. "I still love her. All I ever wanted was to take care of her and our child. If my attempts to help her came across as controlling, I am truly sorry, but I never intended to cause harm." The jury seemed moved. Carolyn watched some of them nod sympathetically, and her heart sank. During cross-examination, Margaret Foster circled Marcus slowly, asking precise questions about specific incidents. He parried each one skillfully, offering alternative explanations, expressing confusion about the accusations. Then Margaret pulled out the laptop. "Mr. Whitmore, do you recognize this device?" Marcus's composure flickered. "It looks like my personal computer. The one stolen by your mistress, as your defense has characterized it." "Yes. I would like to play a recording found on this device, Your Honor." Douglas Mercer objected strenuously, but Judge Winters overruled him. The recording had been authenticated by forensic experts and was directly relevant to the charges. The courtroom fell silent as Marcus's own voice filled the room. "She is becoming a problem," the recording said. "Just like Elizabeth was a problem. We handled Elizabeth. We can handle this one too. After the baby is born, we can revisit our contingency options." Another voice, male, unfamiliar, responded. "The same arrangement as before. Something more elegant this time. Elizabeth's accident was too quick, too easy. This one deserves to suffer first." The recording ended. The silence stretched. Marcus's face had gone pale. "Mr. Whitmore," Margaret said quietly, "would you like to explain what contingency options you were discussing for the first time in the entire trial?" Marcus Whitmore had no smooth answer ready. "That recording is out of context," he said. "I was speaking hypothetically. It was dark humor about a difficult marriage. Dark humor about arranging your wife's death, the same way you arranged your first wife's death. I did not kill Elizabeth." Then explain the payments to a mechanic who specializes in untraceable automotive sabotage. Explain the life insurance policy you took out on Elizabeth 3 months before her accident. Explain why that same mechanic received a phone call from your private line 2 days before your first wife died. Marcus looked at the jury, at his lawyers, at the packed courtroom gallery. Everyone was staring at him with the same expression: horror, disgust, realization. "I want to speak with my attorney," he said. "You are on the stand. Mr. Whitmore, you can speak with your attorney during recess." "I have nothing more to say." Margaret smiled thinly. "No further questions, Your Honor." During the recess, Carolyn sat in a witness room with her father, neither of them speaking. The weight of what had just been revealed hung heavy in the air. "He killed her," Carolyn said finally. "He actually killed Elizabeth, and he was going to kill me." Richard nodded, his jaw tight with anger. "Yes. If I had not gotten out when I did." "Do not think about that." Richard took her hands. "You got out. You are here. You are safe." The afternoon session brought closing arguments. Margaret Foster wove together the threads of evidence into an unassailable narrative of calculated cruelty and criminal intent. She showed the jury the pattern control, abuse, escalation, elimination. She reminded them of the voices of the survivors and the silence of those who did not survive. Marcus Whitmore believed he was untouchable. Margaret concluded, He believed his money and his charm would protect him from consequences. He was wrong. Today, you have the opportunity to show him and every abuser like him that no one is above the law, that women who speak up will be believed, that justice still means something in this country. Douglas Mercer's closing was passionate but hollow. He hammered on reasonable doubt, on the credibility of the witnesses, on the possibility of conspiracy against an innocent man. But the jury's faces told the story. They were not buying it. Judge Winters sent them to deliberate late in the afternoon. Caroline waited in the courthouse, surrounded by her father and the legal team. As the hours ticked by, she thought about Miranda, who had not lived to see this moment. She thought about Elizabeth, who had never gotten justice at all. She thought about her daughter, growing inside her, who would be born into a world where her mother had fought back and won, or lost. The verdict was still uncertain. At 9:30 that evening, the jury returned. The forewoman stood, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and steady eyes. Judge Winters asked for the verdict. The courtroom held its collective breath. On the count of aggravated assault, we the jury find the defendant guilty. Caroline's hands began to shake. On the count of financial fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of conspiracy, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of obstruction of justice, we find the defendant guilty. One by one, the verdicts fell like hammer blows. Guilty on all counts. Marcus Whitmore sat motionless, his face ashen, as his carefully constructed world collapsed around him. Judge Winters scheduled sentencing for the following week and remanded Marcus to custody without bail. As the guards approached to escort him away, Marcus turned and looked directly at Caroline. "This is not over," he said quietly. "Yes," Caroline replied. "It is." They led him away in handcuffs. Caroline watched until he disappeared through the side door, then finally allowed herself to breathe. The week between the verdict and sentencing passed in a blur of media appearances, congratulatory calls, and emotional reunions. Teddy came to the safe house with flowers and apologies, tears streaming down his face as he begged his sister to forgive him for doubting her. "I should have believed you," he said. "From the very beginning. I should have been on your side." "You are here now, damn," Caroline said, hugging him. "That is what matters." Dr. Vance reached out as well, wanting to know if Caroline was all right, if there was anything else she could do to help. Caroline invited her to the sentencing hearing. The day of sentencing, Judge Winters delivered a blistering statement before announcing the punishment. "Mr. Whitmore, you have demonstrated a pattern of calculated cruelty that is truly chilling. You systematically abused your wife, stole her assets, attempted to discredit her when she tried to escape, and made plans to end her life the same way you ended your first wife's. You believed your wealth and status placed you above the law. You were wrong." She sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of early parole. Additional charges related to Elizabeth's death were pending and would likely add more time. As Marcus was led away, Caroline felt something loosen in her chest. Not triumph, exactly, not even relief. Just an absence of fear that she had not realized she had been carrying until it was gone. 1 week later, Caroline went into labor. The birth was complicated. 7 hours of contractions followed by an emergency cesarean section when the baby's heart rate dropped dangerously. Caroline lay on the operating table, watching the fluorescent lights blur above her, praying to anyone who might be listening. When she heard her daughter's first cry, she wept. The baby was small, just under 5 pounds, and spent 3 weeks in the NICU before she was strong enough to come home. They named her Grace. Not Hope, not Victory, not any of the triumphant names that would have seemed appropriate. Grace, because survival was not about winning. It was about being granted another chance to live. The aftermath of the trial brought not the fairy tale ending Caroline had once dreamed of, but something more complicated and ultimately more real. Grace had health challenges that would require ongoing care. Respiratory issues from her premature birth, developmental concerns that would need monitoring. Caroline spent hours in doctors' offices and therapy sessions, learning how to help her daughter thrive despite the difficult start. Her relationship with her father was healing but scarred. They talked more openly now than they ever had, but there were still silences loaded with old hurts and missed years that could not be recovered. Teddy tried to make up for his doubt, but trust, once broken, rebuilt slowly. They had dinner together every Sunday, the four of them, Richard and Teddy and Caroline and Grace. The conversation was careful, the laughter tentative, but it was a beginning. Vance lost her hospital privileges. Marcus's connections, even from prison, had reached far enough to damage her career before they were fully severed. She was rebuilding, slowly, at a smaller clinic that valued integrity over politics. Caroline visited her sometimes, bringing Grace to see the woman who had helped save both their lives. Vanessa Holt entered witness protection after the trial. There were still people loyal to Marcus who might want revenge against the woman who had brought him down. Caroline received one letter from an anonymous address 6 months after the verdict. "I am safe," it said. "I hope you are too. Thank you for showing me the way out." Caroline framed the letter and hung it in her office at the foundation. The nightmares did not stop. Caroline still woke at 3 in the morning sometimes, her heart pounding, phantom hands at her throat. She attended therapy twice a week, learning techniques to manage the PTSD that lived in her body like an uninvited guest. There were good days and bad days. There were moments of joy so sharp they hurt, and moments of darkness so deep and she wondered if she would ever find her way back to the light. But she kept going. For Grace, for Miranda, for Elizabeth, for all the women who had not escaped their own gilded cages. Survival, she learned, was not a destination. It was a daily choice. 1 year after the verdict, Caroline stood at a podium in the lobby of the Miranda Collins Foundation for Domestic Violence Survivors. The building was nothing like the grand institutions her father typically funded. No marble columns or crystal chandeliers here, just clean lines, comfortable furniture, and walls painted in soothing shades of blue and green. Behind her, a bronze plaque bore the foundation's motto, "From pain, we rise." The crowd gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony was small but significant. Advocates who had worked tirelessly to bring the foundation to life. Survivors who had found shelter and support through its programs. Journalists who had covered Caroline's story and followed its aftermath. Richard and Teddy stood near the front, Grace asleep in her grandfather's arms. Caroline cleared her throat and began to speak. 1 year ago, I was a woman who believed she had lost everything. My identity, my safety, my faith in the people who were supposed to love me. I had been isolated, abused, and gaslit into believing that I was the problem, that I was too broken to deserve anything better. She paused, looking out at the faces before her. I am here today because of the courage of other people. Miranda Collins, who recognized my suffering and refused to look away. Dr. Eleanor Vance, who risked her career to reach out to my family. Vanessa Holt, who found the strength to tell the truth even when it terrified her. My father, who waited for me to be ready and then fought alongside me with everything he had. Her voice caught slightly on the next words. And I am here because I finally found the courage to stop being silent. That was the hardest part, harder than the abuse, in some ways, admitting that I had made mistakes, accepting help from people I had pushed away, facing the judgment of a world that often blames victims for their own suffering. She straightened her shoulders. The Miranda Collins Foundation exists to make that journey a little easier for others. We provide emergency shelter for women fleeing dangerous situations. We offer legal assistance to navigate the complex process of restraining orders and custody battles. We fund therapy and counseling services because trauma does not end when the physical danger stops. And we advocate for systemic changes that will make it harder for abusers to use wealth and influence to escape consequences. Caroline gestured to the building around her. This is not a monument to my survival. It is a promise to every woman still trapped in a situation like mine. You are not alone. You are not crazy. And there is a way out, even when it feels impossible to see. After the ceremony, Caroline lingered in the lobby, accepting congratulations and answering questions. Grace had woken up and was toddling unsteadily around the room, her hand firmly gripping Richard's finger. At 15 months old, she was small for her age but fierce in temperament, with her mother's determined chin and her grandfather's sharp eyes. Teddy approached with a cup of coffee and a sheepish expression. I never apologized properly, Pa, he said, for not believing you, for not being there when you needed me. Caroline took the coffee and sipped it slowly. You apologized a dozen times, and I will keep apologizing until it feels like enough. She studied her brother's face, seeing the genuine remorse there, They had been close as children, before their mother's death and their father's grief had created distance between everyone in the family. Reconnecting was slow work, like learning a language they had once spoken fluently, but mostly forgotten. "I forgive you, T," she said finally. "I forgave you a long time ago. But trust is different from forgiveness. Trust has to be rebuilt." Teddy nodded. "I am working on it." "I know you are. That is why you are here." Later that evening, after the guests had left and the staff was cleaning up, Caroline drove to the cemetery where Miranda Collins was buried. She had been making this trip every few weeks since the trial ended, bringing flowers and updates about the foundation that bore Miranda's name. The grave was simple, marked by a modest headstone with Miranda's name and dates. No elaborate epitaph, no grand monument, just daisies planted around the base, blooming cheerfully despite the autumn chill. Caroline knelt in the grass and arranged the fresh flowers she had brought. "We did it," she said softly. "The foundation is official now. The first shelter opened last month in Bridgeport. 3 women are staying there with their children, getting back on their feet. We have a legal team that has already helped 15 survivors get protective orders." She paused, watching a bird hop among the nearby headstones. "I wish you could see it. You would probably tell me I am being too modest in my speeches and not giving myself enough credit. You always said I needed to stop apologizing for taking up space." Grace's babbling from the stroller made Caroline smile. "That is your great-aunt Miranda," she told her daughter. "She saved our lives. When you are older, I will tell you all about her." She stood, brushing grass from her knees, and looked up at the sky. The afternoon light was golden, the kind that made everything look softer and more beautiful. Carolyn thought about the woman she had been a year ago, terrified and trapped and believing that escape was impossible. She thought about all the small moments of courage that had led her here, each one building on the last until she had found her way to freedom. The drive back to her father's house took 40 minutes. Sunday dinners had become a tradition since the trial ended, a weekly gathering that felt like the slow building of something new from the wreckage of the past. Richard met her at the door, taking Grace from her arms with the practiced ease of a grandfather who had spent the past year making up for lost time. "You were brilliant today," he said. "I was terrified," Carolyn admitted. "Public speaking still makes me want to run away. And yet you did it anyway." Richard bounced Grace gently, making her giggle. "That is the definition of courage." They walked together into the dining room, where Teddy was already setting the table. The room smelled of roast chicken and herbs, a recipe their mother had made when they were children. Richard had hired a chef who could replicate it perfectly. For a moment, Caroline stood in the doorway, watching her family move around each other with careful affection. It was not the family she had grown up with. It was not the family she had imagined having when she dreamed of the future as a young woman. But it was real, and it was hers, and it was enough. After dinner, she stood by the window watching the sun set over the Connecticut hills. Richard joined her, 2 glasses of wine in his hands. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "People ask me if I have forgiven Marcus." Carolyn said slowly, "I tell them forgiveness is not about him. It is about refusing to carry his weight anymore. Some days I manage it, some days I do not." Richard nodded, waiting. "They ask if I am grateful to you for saving me. I tell them you did not save me. You stood beside me while I saved myself. That distinction matters." "It does," Richard agreed. "And they ask if my story has a happy ending." Caroline sipped her wine. "I tell them it has a real ending. My daughter is alive. I am free. The man who hurt me is in prison. But I still wake up at 3 in the morning sometimes, checking locks that are already checked. That is not a fairy tale. That is survival." She turned to face her father fully. "And survival, I have learned, is its own kind of victory, imperfect, exhausting, and absolutely worth fighting for." Richard raised his glass. "To survival, then." Carolyn clinked her glass against his. "To survival." Through the window, the last light of day painted the sky in shades of gold and pink and deepening blue. Somewhere in the house, Grace laughed at something Teddy had done, the sound pure and unburdened by the darkness that had surrounded her beginning. Carolyn smiled and went to join her family, leaving the ghosts of the past where they belonged. Behind her, the sunset faded slowly into dusk. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears, new opportunities to choose courage over comfort. But tonight, in this moment, she was exactly where she needed to be. Alive, free, still fighting, still rising.